In the winter of 1983, a military exchange in Norfolk, Virginia became the target of one of the most precisely executed thefts in Coast Guard history. $4.6 million vanished in less than 20 minutes, leaving investigators with no suspects, no witnesses, and no clear path forward. The case consumed federal agents for years before eventually going cold, buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and time. But in 2011, during a routine facility cleanup, a maintenance worker pried open a rusted storage locker that had been sealed for nearly 3 decades. What they found inside wasn't money, but it was enough to crack open a case that had remained untouchable for 28 years. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. On the morning of December 15, 1983, the Coast Guard Exchange Facility in Norfolk was operating under its standard Thursday routine. The Exchange, a sprawling retail complex serving military personnel and their families, processed thousands of transactions daily. Cash deposits, inventory transfers, and payroll distributions moved through the facility with clockwork precision. That morning, the building housed its largest cash reserve of the month, nearly $5 million in federal funds awaiting secure transport to regional banking facilities. The exchange operated on a strict security protocol. All high-value transactions required dual authorization, surveillance cameras monitored key areas, and armed guards maintained constant presence during business hours. The facility's main vault, a reinforced steel chamber installed in 1979, contained multiple compartments secured by time-locked mechanisms. Access required 2 separate key cards, both held by different supervisors, and entry was logged automatically through an electronic system. At approximately 10:30 that morning, the facility received what appeared to be a routine maintenance call. The caller, identifying himself as a representative from Atlantic Security Services, reported a malfunction in the building's fire suppression system. According to the log, the caller explained that a sensor in the main corridor had triggered multiple false alarms overnight, requiring immediate inspection to prevent potential system shutdown. The exchange manager, following standard procedure, authorized the maintenance visit and provided building access codes. The maintenance team arrived in a white panel van bearing the Atlantic Security logo, professional uniforms, and proper identification badges. 3 technicians entered through the service entrance, each carrying diagnostic equipment and tool cases. They moved with practiced efficiency, speaking briefly with the front desk staff before proceeding to the maintenance areas. Nothing about their appearance or behavior raised suspicion among the employees present. What no one realized was that Atlantic Security Services had never received a service call for that location. The company's dispatch log showed no scheduled maintenance for the Norfolk Exchange, and their employee records contained no match for the identification numbers presented that morning. The uniforms, the van, the badges, even the diagnostic equipment had all been carefully prepared to create a flawless illusion of legitimacy. The 3 men worked methodically through the building's lower level, ostensibly testing fire suppression components while actually mapping the facility's security infrastructure. They identified camera blind spots, noted guard patrol patterns, and located the primary electrical panels controlling the surveillance system. Their reconnaissance was disguised as routine maintenance checks, allowing them to move freely without attracting attention. During their inspection, one of the men approached the main vault area under the pretense of checking suppression nozzles installed near the ceiling. The vault door stood closed, its time lock mechanism clearly visible through the reinforced glass partition. But the man wasn't interested in the vault itself. His attention focused on a series of utility conduits running along the adjacent wall, conduits that carried both electrical power and data transmission cables serving the facility's security systems. At 11:15, approximately 45 minutes after their arrival, The maintenance team reported completion of their inspection. They informed staff that the sensor malfunction had been resolved and that the system was functioning normally. The front desk logged their departure, noting that the work had been completed ahead of schedule with no complications reported. The team loaded their equipment back into the van and exited through the same service entrance they had used upon arrival. Their departure appeared routine, professional, and unremarkable. No one questioned their credentials, their work, or their early completion time. The van disappeared into Norfolk traffic, leaving behind what appeared to be a successful maintenance visit. But the visit had been anything but routine. During their time inside the facility, the team had accomplished several critical objectives. They had disabled specific components of the surveillance system in a way that would not trigger immediate alerts. They had identified the exact locations of pressure-sensitive floor panels near the vault. Most importantly, they had installed a small electronic device within the utility conduit, a device designed to intercept and record security system communications. The device, no larger than a cigarette pack, was positioned to monitor the vault's locking mechanism without being detected by standard security sweeps. It would remain dormant for 72 hours, collecting data on access patterns, timing sequences, and authorization protocols. After 3 days, it would transmit its collected information to a predetermined location before permanently erasing its memory and becoming undetectable. 3 days later, the real operation began. On the evening of December 18, 1983, as the exchange prepared to close for the weekend, the building's security systems experienced what appeared to be a minor electrical fluctuation. Lights dimmed briefly in several areas, and 2 surveillance cameras in the main corridor temporarily lost power before automatically resetting. The evening shift supervisor noted the incident in the daily log but classified it as routine, similar to power fluctuations that occasionally affected the aging facility. What the supervisor didn't realize was that the fluctuation had been carefully orchestrated. The electronic device installed 3 days earlier had transmitted a precise signal, temporarily disrupting specific circuits while leaving others operational. This created a narrow window of vulnerability, lasting exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds, during which the vault's secondary locking mechanism would default to manual override. At 7:42 that evening, as the last customers completed their transactions and employees began closing procedures, 3 individuals entered the exchange through the main entrance. They appeared to be military personnel in dress uniforms, each carrying small overnight bags as if preparing for weekend travel. Their bearing was confident, their uniforms properly fitted, and their identification appeared authentic under casual inspection. The trio moved through the facility with purpose but without haste. They nodded politely to staff members, examined merchandise displays, and gave every appearance of routine shopping. One approached the electronics section, another browsed the clothing department, while the third made his way toward the customer service counter. Their actions seemed completely normal, the kind of late evening shopping typical among military personnel preparing for weekend leave. But their true objective lay elsewhere. While maintaining their cover as customers, they were actually positioning themselves at strategic points throughout the facility. Each had memorized the building's layout, security camera positions, and staff movement patterns. They knew exactly where to stand to avoid surveillance coverage and how to time their actions with the evening shift's routine procedures. The facility's closing routine followed a strict protocol. At 8 o'clock, the main entrance would be locked, and remaining customers would be escorted to complete their purchases. By 8:15, all cash registers would be secured, and daily receipts would be transported to the vault for overnight storage. The final security sweep would begin at 8:30, with the building cleared and alarms activated by 9 o'clock. Tonight, that routine would be interrupted in ways the staff could never have anticipated. As the clock approached 8:15, the 3 men began their final positioning. The one near electronics, a tall figure with precise movements, checked his watch and made subtle eye contact with his companions. The second man, stationed near the clothing section, adjusted his overnight bag and moved closer to the main corridor. The third, who had been lingering near customer service, walked deliberately toward the restroom area at the rear of the building. The evening shift supervisor, Marcus Washington, initiated the standard closing sequence. He moved through the facility with practiced efficiency, directing employees to secure their stations and prepare daily deposits. Washington had managed evening operations for over 2 years and took pride in maintaining the exchange's reputation for security and efficiency. His thorough approach to closing procedures had earned recognition from district management. At exactly 8:17, as Washington supervised the transport of cash receipts toward the vault area, the building's electrical system experienced another fluctuation. This time, the disruption was more pronounced. Several sections lost power completely, emergency lighting activated, and the facility's main security panel began displaying error codes. The backup generators kicked in immediately, but the transition created a brief period of confusion among the staff. In that moment of distraction, the three men executed their plan with surgical precision. The tall man near electronics moved swiftly down a darkened corridor toward the administrative offices. His companion from the clothing section approached the vault area from an alternate route, while the third man emerged from the restroom carrying what appeared to be maintenance equipment rather than an overnight bag. The power fluctuation had been timed to coincide with the vault's daily cash deposit routine. During the brief electrical transition, the facility's automated locking systems had defaulted to manual control, exactly as the reconnaissance device had predicted 3 days earlier. The vault door, which normally required dual keycard authorization, was now accessible through a single override sequence known only to senior management. But these men knew that sequence. The third conspirator, who had spent considerable time studying facility operations, produced a small electronic device and connected it to the vault's control panel. The device, programmed with data collected during the maintenance visit, began cycling through authorization codes at rapid speed. Within 90 seconds, it had identified the correct override sequence and transmitted the unlock command. The vault door opened with a soft mechanical hum. Inside, the facility's weekend cash reserve sat in organized stacks within reinforced containers. Federal funds, payroll deposits, and daily receipts totaled exactly $4.6 million, all prepared for Monday morning transport to regional banking centers. The money was arranged according to strict military protocol, with each container labeled, sealed, and logged in the facility's central database. The 2 men assigned to the actual theft worked with remarkable efficiency. They had brought specialized equipment designed to handle the sealed containers without triggering tamper alerts. Using hydraulic tools, they opened specific containers while leaving others untouched, creating the illusion that the theft was opportunistic rather than carefully planned. They selected high-denomination bills and left behind smaller denominations and coins, reducing the physical volume of stolen material. Meanwhile, their third accomplice monitored the facility's security status from his position near the administrative offices. He maintained radio contact with the others using short-range devices that wouldn't be detected by the facility's communication monitoring systems. His role was to provide early warning if staff members approached the vault area or if security systems began returning to normal operation. The entire vault operation lasted less than 12 minutes. The containers were resealed, the vault door was secured, and the override device was removed without leaving any trace of tampering. The stolen money, now packed in lightweight duffel bags, was divided among the 3 men overnight luggage. As the facility's electrical and concealed within their systems stabilized and normal lighting returned, the 3 men resumed their positions as ordinary customers completing weekend shopping. They moved through the exchange's main areas, made small purchases to create legitimate transaction records, and interacted casually with staff members. Nothing about their behavior suggested they had just completed one of the largest military facility thefts in Virginia history. At 8:45, as the facility prepared to close to remaining customers, the three men approached the main exit together. They thanked the staff for staying open late, made friendly conversation about weekend plans, and walked calmly to a sedan parked in the visitor lot. Their departure appeared completely routine, the kind of evening conclusion typical among military personnel finishing last-minute errands. The sedan pulled away from the exchange and merged into Norfolk evening traffic. Inside, $4.6 million in federal funds traveled through the city streets, beginning a journey that would keep investigators searching for nearly 3 decades. The men drove without speeding, followed all traffic regulations, and gave no outward sign of the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. Behind them, the Coast Guard exchange continued its closing routine. Marcus Washington completed his final security sweep, noting in his log that the evening had proceeded normally despite the minor electrical issues earlier. The vault appeared secure, all systems showed green status, and the facility was ready for weekend shutdown. He had no reason to suspect that anything was missing. The theft wouldn't be discovered until Monday morning, when the weekly cash audit revealed the massive discrepancy. By then, the trail had already gone cold, the money had vanished, and the three men had disappeared into the fabric of American society. The case would consume federal investigators for years, generating thousands of documents, hundreds of interviews, and multiple grand jury proceedings. But it would take 28 years and the opening of a forgotten storage locker before the truth finally began to emerge. The federal investigation into the Norfolk Coast Guard exchange theft began within hours of the discovery on Monday morning, December 21, 1983. Special Agent Patricia Williams of the Naval Criminal Investigative Service arrived at the scene before noon, accompanied by a team of forensic specialists and financial auditors. Williams, a 15-year veteran of military criminal investigations, had handled numerous cases involving theft of government property, but nothing approaching this scale or sophistication. The initial crime scene analysis revealed the methodical nature of the operation. The vault showed no signs of forced entry, and the locking mechanisms appeared to function normally. Security cameras had recorded nothing unusual during the weekend, and all access logs indicated proper authorization sequences. The thieves had left behind no fingerprints, no tool marks, and no physical evidence that could be traced through conventional investigative methods. Williams interviewed every employee who had worked during the Thursday through Friday time frame. The maintenance visit from Atlantic Security Services immediately drew attention, but initial verification suggested the call had been legitimate. It wasn't until investigators contacted Atlantic Security directly that the deception became apparent. The company had no record of any service calls to the Norfolk Exchange, and their employee database contained no matches for the identification numbers recorded by facility staff. The revelation transformed the case from a simple theft into something far more complex. The fake maintenance visit demonstrated advanced planning, detailed knowledge of facility operations, and access to professional-grade equipment and uniforms. This wasn't the work of opportunistic criminals, but rather a carefully orchestrated operation executed by individuals with sophisticated understanding of military security protocols. Within the first week of investigation, Williams had compiled a preliminary profile of the suspects. The operation required at least 3 people with specific skill sets, extensive knowledge of Coast Guard exchange procedures, and access to specialized equipment. The timing suggested inside information about cash reserves and security routines. Most significantly, the lack of violence or confrontation indicated professionals who prioritized precision over intimidation. Federal investigators expanded their inquiry to include background checks on all current and former exchange employees, reviews of vendor relationships, and analysis of anyone with authorized access to facility information. The list of potential suspects quickly grew to over 200 individuals, ranging from current staff members to former employees, maintenance contractors, and security personnel who had worked at the facility within the previous 2 years. Meanwhile, the Treasury Department initiated a separate investigation focused on tracking the stolen currency. $4.6 million in federal funds couldn't simply vanish without leaving some trace in the financial system. Special agents began monitoring banks throughout Virginia and neighboring states, looking for unusual deposit patterns, cash transactions, or currency exchange activities that might indicate the stolen money entering circulation. The search proved more challenging than anticipated. Unlike marked bills or sequential currency, the stolen funds consisted of standard denominations that were virtually impossible to distinguish from legitimate money once they entered the banking system. The thieves had also been selective, taking primarily $20, $50, and $100 bills while leaving behind smaller denominations and coins. This suggested they understood the practical challenges of moving large volumes of cash without detection. 3 months into the investigation, Williams received what appeared to be the first significant break in the case. A bank in Richmond, Virginia, reported a series of large cash deposits made by an individual using multiple accounts and false identification. The deposits totaled nearly $400,000 over a 6-week period, with the money arriving in denominations consistent with the Norfolk theft. The suspect, identified through surveillance footage as a black male in his 30s, had opened accounts using forged documents and Social Security numbers belonging to deceased individuals. He made deposits during different shifts, used various branch locations, and never deposited amounts large enough to trigger automatic federal reporting requirements. The pattern suggested careful planning and detailed knowledge of banking regulations. Federal agents traced the false identities back to a document forgery operation based in Washington, D.C. The forger, when confronted with federal charges, agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced sentencing. He identified the suspect as someone who had purchased a complete identity package, including driver's license, Social Security card, and employment documentation, approximately 2 months before the exchange theft. But the trail ended there. The forger had met his customer only once, in a brief transaction conducted in a public parking lot. Payment had been made in cash, and no contact information had been exchanged. The suspect had used an alias even when purchasing the false documents, creating multiple layers of deception that effectively severed any connection to his real identity. The Richmond bank deposits represented less than 10% of the stolen money, suggesting the funds had been divided among multiple individuals who were laundering their shares through different channels. Williams theorized that the operation involved a core team of 3 to 5 people, each responsible for disposing of their portion of the theft through separate networks. This approach minimized risk while maximizing the chances that at least some portion of the money would successfully enter circulation. As the investigation entered its 2nd year, federal resources began shifting toward other priorities. The case remained active, but the lack of new leads and the enormous scope of potential suspects made progress increasingly difficult. Williams continued pursuing every available angle, but the thieves had constructed their operation with remarkable attention to detail, anticipating and countering most conventional investigative approaches. In 1985, the case received renewed attention when a former Coast Guard exchange employee came forward with information about suspicious activities he had observed months before the theft. Jerome Mitchell, who had worked in the facility's inventory department, reported that he had noticed unusual interest from visitors in the facility's security procedures and cash handling protocols. Mitchell had left the exchange in September 1983, approximately 3 months before the theft, to accept a position at a civilian retail operation. Mitchell's testimony provided investigators with their first potential inside connection. He described several incidents where individuals claiming to be from various government agencies or contractor organizations had asked detailed questions about facility operations. These visits had seemed routine at the time, but in retrospect they appeared to be intelligence-gathering activities designed to support the eventual theft. Most significantly, Mitchell identified one individual who had shown particular interest in the facility's closing procedures and weekend security arrangements. The man, whom Mitchell described as a black male approximately 40 years old, had claimed to represent a security consulting firm conducting a routine assessment of Coast Guard facilities. He had spent several hours at the exchange, interviewed multiple employees, and requested detailed information about cash handling and vault operations. Williams immediately recognized the potential significance of Mitchell's testimony. A security consultant would have legitimate reason to ask detailed questions about facility operations, making such visits an ideal cover for reconnaissance activities. The timeline also aligned perfectly with the thieves' apparent knowledge of exchange procedures and security protocols. However, attempts to locate the security consulting firm proved fruitless. The company name provided by Mitchell led to a post office box that had been closed shortly after the theft, and no business registration could be found in Virginia or neighboring states. Once again, the suspects had used false credentials and temporary arrangements that dissolved as soon as their purpose was served. Despite these challenges, Mitchell's testimony provided investigators with a new avenue of inquiry. Williams began examining all contractor relationships and vendor interactions with the exchange during the months preceding the theft. The review revealed dozens of legitimate business contacts, but also several that couldn't be fully verified through normal channels. The investigation had now consumed 3 years and generated thousands of pages of documentation, but the core mystery remained unsolved. The stolen money had vanished, the suspects had disappeared, and every lead had eventually dead-ended in false identities and temporary arrangements. Federal prosecutors quietly acknowledged that, without new evidence or witness testimony, the case was unlikely to result in arrests or convictions. In 1987, the active investigation was officially suspended, though the case remained open in federal files. Williams was reassigned to other duties, and the Norfolk exchange theft joined the ranks of major unsolved federal crimes. The facility itself implemented new security measures, upgraded its surveillance systems, and revised its cash handling procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. But the money was never recovered, and the truth remained buried beneath layers of deception and misdirection. The thieves had executed what federal investigators privately acknowledged as one of the most sophisticated military facility thefts in American history. Their success lay not in violence or intimidation, but in meticulous planning, professional execution, and an almost perfect understanding of how to exploit the weaknesses in institutional security systems. For nearly 3 decades, the case files gathered dust in federal storage facilities, occasionally reviewed by new agents but never generating fresh leads or renewed investigation. The stolen $4.6 million had long since been written off by the Treasury Department, and most of the original investigators had retired or moved on to other careers. The truth might have remained buried forever, if not for a routine maintenance operation in 2011 that finally cracked open the secrets the thieves had worked so hard to conceal. In February 2011, the Norfolk Coast Guard Exchange underwent a comprehensive facility renovation as part of a broader modernization initiative. The project involved updating electrical systems, replacing aging infrastructure, and converting storage areas to accommodate new retail configurations. During the demolition of a maintenance corridor in the building's lower level, construction workers encountered a section of wall that appeared to have been modified from its original design. Behind a false panel, secured with industrial adhesive, and hidden for nearly 3 decades, Workers discovered a narrow storage locker measuring approximately 4 feet wide by 2 feet deep. The locker had been professionally concealed, with its entrance masked by utility pipes and electrical conduits that gave the impression of standard building infrastructure. The space was completely sealed, with no visible access points from the main corridor. The construction foreman initially assumed the compartment contained abandoned maintenance equipment or outdated electrical components. However, when the sealed door was finally pried open, the contents proved far more significant than anyone had anticipated. Inside the cramped space, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic sheeting, investigators found a collection of items that would reopen one of the most sophisticated thefts in military history. The cache contained detailed floor plans of the Coast Guard Exchange, hand-drawn with precise measurements and notations indicating security camera positions, guard patrol routes, and electrical system access points. The plans were dated November 1983, approximately 1 month before the theft occurred. Also present were several identification badges bearing the Atlantic Security Services logo, the same company that had been used as cover for the reconnaissance mission 3 days before the robbery. More significantly, the locker contained financial records documenting the systematic laundering of stolen funds through a network of shell companies and false identities. The records, written in coded notation, detailed transactions totaling over $4 million, processed through banks in 7 different states between January 1984 and March 1987. Each entry included dates, amounts, and reference numbers that corresponded to specific money laundering operations. Among the most damaging evidence was a detailed operational manual outlining the theft from initial planning through final execution. The document, handwritten in careful block letters, described the recruitment of participants, the acquisition of equipment and uniforms, and the specific timing sequences required to exploit the facility's security vulnerabilities. The manual read like a professional training document, suggesting the operation had been planned with military precision. The discovery immediately triggered a joint investigation involving the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and Treasury Department financial crimes specialists. Agent Patricia Williams, now retired from federal service, was contacted as a consultant due to her extensive knowledge of the original case. At 71 years old, Williams brought decades of investigative experience and intimate familiarity with the evidence collected during the 1980s inquiry. The hidden locker also contained personal items that provided the first concrete leads to the identity of those responsible. A service medal belonging to Coast Guard Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, reported stolen from his quarters in December 1982, suggested at least one participant had connections to military personnel stationed in the Norfolk area. Additionally, investigators found a small address book containing names and contact information for individuals in Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland. The address book proved particularly valuable because it included coded references that aligned with the financial records found in the same cache. Cross-referencing the names with federal databases revealed that several individuals listed had criminal histories involving fraud, identity theft, and financial crimes. 3 names appeared repeatedly throughout the documentation, suggesting they represented key figures in the money laundering network rather than peripheral contacts. Financial analysts began the painstaking process of reconstructing the money trail using the recovered records. The documents revealed a sophisticated operation that had moved stolen funds through multiple layers of legitimate businesses, real estate transactions, and investment accounts. The laundering network had operated for over 3 years, gradually introducing the stolen money into the financial system through carefully structured transactions designed to avoid federal reporting requirements. One pattern that emerged from the financial analysis involved a series of cash-intensive businesses that had been established in the months following the theft. These enterprises, including used car dealerships, restaurant operations, and small construction companies provided ideal vehicles for converting stolen currency into legitimate business revenue. The businesses were registered under various names, but the financial records suggested common ownership and coordinated management. The investigation team also discovered that the stolen money had been used to finance additional criminal activities, including document forgery operations, identity theft schemes, and at least 2 other major thefts from federal facilities. The Norfolk Exchange robbery had apparently served as seed capital for a broader criminal enterprise that had operated successfully for several years before eventually dissolving. DNA analysis of items found in the hidden locker provided the breakthrough investigators had been seeking for nearly 30 years. Genetic material recovered from the service medal and several documents matched profiles in the federal criminal database, identifying 2 individuals with extensive histories of sophisticated financial crimes. Both men had been questioned during the original investigation, but had been eliminated as suspects due to solid alibis and no apparent connection to the exchange facility. The genetic evidence linked the crime to Derek Washington and Calvin Brooks, 2 men who had managed to evade justice for 28 years through careful planning and disciplined silence. Washington, now 67 and living quietly in Baltimore, was arrested without incident at his modest apartment. Brooks had died in 2008, taking his secrets to the grave. The third conspirator, identified through witness testimony as Jerome Mitchell himself, had provided inside information while working at the facility before orchestrating his own departure months before the theft. The hidden locker had preserved what the thieves believed would never be discovered: a complete record of their methodical operation and the systematic conversion of stolen federal funds into legitimate wealth. Washington's confession filled in the remaining details, describing how 3 men had executed one of the most sophisticated military thefts in American history, using nothing more than patience, precision, and an understanding that the best hiding place is often in plain sight. In the end, it wasn't advanced forensics or brilliant detective work that solved the case. It was time itself, slowly eroding the foundations of even the most carefully constructed deception, until a simple renovation project exposed the truth that had been waiting in the walls for nearly 3 decades.